Margaret Thompson sat quietly in her kitchen, staring at the small white test in her trembling hands. At 72 years old, she never thought she would cede to pink lines again. After 48 years of marriage to her dear husband William, who was now 78, they had accepted their life without children. The morning sun streamed through the lace curtains that Margaret had sewn herself 20 years ago. The same curtains that had witnessed countless breakfasts, quiet conversations, and moments of both joy and sorrow in their small cottage. Today, however, everything felt different. The familiar kitchen seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the news that would change everything. William worked as a retired carpenter in their small English village of Millbrook. His weathered hands had built half the garden sheds and kitchen cabinets in the neighborhood. Margaret had been a school teacher for most of her adult life, spending 35 years nurturing other people's children with the same care she would have given home. They loved the children in their community like their own. But the ache in Margaret's heart for a baby of her own never truly went away. The couple had tried everything in their younger years. They visited doctors in London, prayed at the village church every Sunday, and even travelled to specialists in Scotland. Each negative test, each failed treatment, each passing year had slowly worn away their hope like water wearing down stone. By the time Margaret reached menopause, they had learned to find peace in their childless life. They travelled together, tended their garden, and found joy in being the favourite aunt and uncle to their nieces and nephews for months now. Margaret had been feeling different at first. She blamed it on getting older, tired, emotional, and experiencing changes in her body that reminded her of dreams from long ago. She would wake up feeling queasy, something she had not experienced since she was a young woman. Her appetite changed, and she found herself craving foods she had not thought about in decades. The strangest part was how her body felt both familiar and foreign at the same time. When she finally gathered the courage to visit Dr. Harrison, the village physician who had delivered most of the babies in Millbrook for the past 30 years, she expected him to tell her it was simply the natural changes of aging. Instead, his face showed the same shock that now reflected in her own eyes as she stared at the test results. Dr. Harrison had run the tests twice, then called a specialist in the city. The news seemed impossible, like something from a fairy tale rather than real life. Modern medicine had created possibilities that previous generations could never have imagined, but even the doctors called it a miracle. She was pregnant. The reality of those words still felt like a dream. Margaret had spent so many years imagining this moment that she had almost forgotten what it would actually feel like. Now, sitting in her quiet kitchen with the proof in her hands, she felt overwhelmed by emotions she could not name. Joy mixed with fear, excitement tangled with worry, and underneath it all, a deep sense of wonder at the mysterious ways life could surprise even those who thought they had seen everything. Margaret's hands shook as she heard William's footsteps on the front porch. She knew those steps as well as she knew her own heartbeat. The slight drag of his left foot from an old injury, the pause as he wiped his boots on the mat she had placed by the door, the gentle way he always turned the handle so as not to startle her if she was reading or napping. How could she tell him? What would he think? They were supposed to be enjoying their golden years, not starting over with a newborn baby. They had just finished paying off their mortgage. Their savings were finally enough for the comfortable retirement they had planned. They talked about visiting their grandnephew in Australia, maybe taking that trip to Ireland they had always dreamed about. Would William be happy? Would he worry about their health, their energy, their ability to care for a child at their age? Margaret knew her husband's kind heart, but she also knew he was a practical man who thought carefully about every decision. This was not a decision they had made together. This was something that had happened to them, something beyond their control or planning. The front door opened, and William called out in his gentle voice, "Hello, love, I'm home." His voice carried the same warmth it had held for nearly 5 decades. Margaret could picture him hanging his coat on the wooden peg he had installed when they first moved to the cottage, smoothing down his grey hair, and looking forward to their evening cup of tea together. Margaret closed her eyes and whispered a prayer for strength. She asked for the right words, for courage, and for William's heart to be open to this impossible gift they had been given. Their whole world was about to change, and she had no idea how he would react to the news that would transform their quiet, predictable life into something entirely new and unknown. William hung his coat by the door and walked into the kitchen, immediately noticing a worried expression on Margaret's face after nearly 5 decades together. He could read her emotions like his favorite book, the way she held her shoulders when she was anxious, the particular crease that formed between her eyebrows when something troubled her deeply, the nervous habit she had of twisting her wedding ring round her finger. He had seen that look before, during the difficult years, when they were trying to have children. It was the same expression she wore after each doctor's appointment, each failed treatment, each month that passed without the news they longed to hear. But they were past all that now, weren't they? Those days of hope and disappointment were behind them, buried under years of acceptance and the quiet contentment they had built together. "What's troubling you, my dear?" he asked, settling into his chair across from her. The wooden chair creaked slightly under his weight, a sound that had become as familiar as breathing in their daily routine. He reached for her hand, instinctively, the way he always did when he sensed she needed comfort. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "William, I need to tell you something that seems impossible." Her words hung in the air like morning mist, delicate and uncertain. She placed the pregnancy test on the table between them, her hands trembling as she let go of the small plastic device that held their future. The kitchen fell silent except for the gentle ticking of the old clock on the wall, the same clock that had marked time through all their years together. William stared at the object on the table, not immediately understanding what he was looking at. His mind, sharp as it was for his age, struggled to make sense of what Margaret was trying to tell him. William picked up the test, squinting through his reading glasses that he had started wearing just a few years ago. The glasses that reminded him daily that time was moving forward, that they were no longer the young couple who had dreamed of filling their house with children's laughter. His weathered face, marked by years of working outdoors and the gentle lines that come from a lifetime of smiling, went through a series of emotions that Margaret watched like someone studying a map of an unknown country. First came confusion, his brow furrowing as he tried to understand what the 2 pink lines meant. Then shock, as the reality of what he was holding began to sink in. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again, as if words had started to form but gotten lost somewhere between his heart and his lips. Then something Margaret couldn't quite identify flickered across his features, something that made her hold her breath in anticipation. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. Margaret's heart pounded so hard she was certain William could hear it across the small table. The sound filled her ears, drowning out even the familiar tick of their old clock. She waited for his reaction, her mind racing through all the possible responses he might have. Would he be angry? The thought seemed unlikely, but fear made her consider it. William had never raised his voice to her in all their years together, but this news was unlike anything they had ever faced. Would he be frightened? That seemed more possible. They were both well past the age when most people became parents. For the first time, their friends were becoming great-grandparents, not new parents. Would he be overwhelmed by the thought of caring for a baby at that age? Margaret herself felt overwhelmed. So she could hardly blame him if he felt the same way. They had grown comfortable in their routines, their quiet evenings, their peaceful mornings. A baby would change everything about the life they had carefully built together. Maybe he would worry about money, about their health, about whether they had the energy to chase after a toddler when other people their age were. Slowing down, maybe. He would think about practical things like school events they might be too old to attend, or whether they would live long enough to see their child graduate from university. Finally, William looked up at her with tears forming in his kind blue eyes, those eyes that had looked at her with love every day for 48 years, that had seen her through illness and health, joy and sorrow, hope and disappointment. But instead of the worry Margaret expected, instead of the fear or confusion or overwhelm, she saw something beautiful beginning to shine through. For the tears. It was a look she recognized but had not seen in many years. It was the same expression he had worn on their wedding day, the same light that had filled his eyes when he first told her he loved her. It was hope, pure and simple, mixed with a joy so deep it seemed to transform his entire face. "Margaret," he said softly, reaching across the table to take her hands in his callous ones. His hands, rough from decades of carpentry work, felt warm and steady against her trembling fingers in all our years together. "I never stopped hoping for this miracle." His words were just the beginning of a response that would change everything. Margaret thought she knew about their love story, about the man she had been married to for nearly half a century, and about the dreams he had kept alive in his heart even when she thought they had both let them go. William stood up slowly and walked round the table to kneel beside Margaret's chair. His knees, stiff from years of physical work, protested as he lowered himself down. But he ignored the discomfort. Nothing mattered more in this moment than being close to his wife, than looking into her eyes as he shared the words that had been locked in his heart for decades. He took her face gently in his hands. The same hands that had built their kitchen table, that had held her through countless nights, that had wiped away her tears during the difficult years when month after month brought disappointment instead of the child they longed for. The tears that had been building in his eyes finally began to fall, creating small rivers down the weathered landscape of his cheeks. "My darling Margaret," he said, his voice thick with emotion that seemed to come from the deepest part of his soul. The words came out rough and unsteady, like an old engine starting up after a long winter. "For 48 years, I carried a secret burden. I believed that our inability to have children was somehow my fault. I felt like I had failed you as a husband." The confession hung between them like a heavy curtain that had finally been pulled aside. Margaret could see the pain in his eyes, the guilt that had lived there so quietly she had never noticed it. All these years, while she had blamed herself, while she had wondered if something was wrong with her body, her husband had been carrying the same burden of responsibility. Margaret's own tears started flowing as William continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, as if speaking this truth was setting something free inside him. "Every birthday, every anniversary, every time I saw you hold our neighbors' babies, I saw the longing in your eyes. I watched you light up when little Emma from down the street would run to you, or when our nephew would fall asleep in your arms. During family gatherings," he paused, his thumb gently wiping away a tear from her cheek, "and I blamed myself for not being able to give you the one thing your heart desired most. I thought I was less of a man because I couldn't make you a mother. I prayed every night, asking why I couldn't give my beautiful wife the gift she deserved more than anyone else in the world." Margaret wanted to speak, to tell him that she had never blamed him, that she had loved him completely regardless of whether they had children or not. But something in his expression told her that he needed to say these words, that they had been building pressure inside him like steam in a kettle. Waiting for the right moment to be released, he paused, gathering his thoughts and his courage, his hands still cradling her face as if she were made of the most precious china. The afternoon light from the kitchen window cast a golden glow around them, making this moment feel almost sacred, like they were in their own private chapel where truth could finally be spoken without fear. "But now I understand something beautiful," William continued, his voice beginning to change from sorrow to wonder. "God wasn't saying no to us all those years. He was saying not yet. He was waiting for us to become the people who could raise this child not just with young energy, but with the wisdom that comes from a lifetime of loving each other." Margaret felt her heart skip as she began to understand what her husband was trying to tell her. This was not the reaction she had expected at all. She had prepared herself for worry, for practical concerns about their age and health and financial situation. Instead, William was talking about divine timing and wisdom, about their long marriage as preparation for this moment. William's shocking words continued to pour out like water from a broken dam, as if 48 years of held feelings were finally finding their voice. "We won't be young parents, Margaret. We'll be something better. We'll be parents who know the value of patience because we've waited so long for this gift. We'll be parents who understand the importance of kindness because we've practiced it with each other through all the good times and the difficult ones." His eyes shone with a light Margaret had not seen since their wedding day, a mixture of joy and certainty that transformed his entire face. "We'll be parents who know the power of unconditional love because we've loved each other unconditionally through everything life has given us. We've loved each other through disappointment and hope, through sickness and health, through the times when we had nothing but each other." Margaret had never heard her gentle husband speak with such passion and clarity. In all their years together, William had been a man of few words, preferring to show his love through actions rather than speeches. He was the type of man who fixed things quietly, who remembered her favorite tea, who held her hand during movies without being asked. But now words were flowing from him like a river that had finally found its path to the sea. His response was nothing like what she had expected. Instead of fear, he offered faith instead of worry. He offered wonder instead of seeing their age as a disadvantage. He saw it as their greatest strength, the thing that would make them not just parents, but the right parents for this unexpected miracle. The weeks that followed were both challenging and wonderful, like walking through a garden where roses and thorns grew side by side. Margaret's pregnancy was closely monitored by Dr. Harrison, the village physician who had delivered most of the babies in Millbrook for over 30 years. He called it medically remarkable but proceeded with careful optimism, scheduling appointments twice as often as he would for a younger mother. Dr. Harrison was a kind man with silver hair and gentle hands who had seen Margaret through many illnesses over the years. He never made her feel foolish for being pregnant at her age, but his careful attention told her that this pregnancy was unlike any other he had managed. He ordered special tests and consulted with specialists in London, making sure that both Margaret and the baby were healthy at every step of the journey. What spread through Millbrook the way news always did in small villages, traveling from house to house like seeds carried by the wind. The reactions were mixed, creating a tapestry of opinions that ranged from wonder to worry. Some neighbors whispered concerns about the couple's age when they thought Margaret and William could not hear. They wondered aloud at the post office and in the grocery store whether it was wise for people in their 70s to become new parents. Others worried about the health risks. remembering stories they had heard about pregnancies in older women. They meant well, but their worried faces and careful questions sometimes made Margaret feel like she was carrying not just a baby, but the weight of everyone's fears and doubts. There were moments when she wondered if she should have kept the news private until the baby was born. But Margaret and William found strength in each other and in the small circle of friends who support the journey without question or judgment. These were the people who understood that love knows no age limits, that miracles come in many forms, and that sometimes the most beautiful gifts arrive when they are least expected. Mrs. Davies from next door was one of their strongest supporters. She was a widow in her 60s who had raised 4 children of her own and understood the joy that a baby brings to a home every Tuesday, without fail. She appeared at their door with a pot of homemade soup, claiming she had made too much for herself, but everyone knew she was making sure Margaret ate well. She would sit in their kitchen for an hour, sharing stories about her own pregnancies and offering practical advice with the wisdom of experienced young Tom Miller, who owned the grocery store where Margaret and William had shopped for 20 years, personally delivered their weekly shopping once Margaret began to tie more easily. Tom was only 35, with a young family of his own. But he treated the elderly couple with the respect and care he would have shown his own grandparents. He never charged them for delivery and often included little treats like Margaret's favorite biscuits or William's preferred tea. The community slowly began to rally around the elderly couple preparing for their first child, Mrs. Anderson, who ran the church charity shop, quietly set aside the nicest baby clothes that came through her door. The local postman, Mr. Roberts, always asked about Margaret's health when he delivered their mail. Even the teenagers, who sometimes seemed indifferent to their elders, would smile and ask about the baby when they saw Margaret in the village. William transformed their spare room into a nursery with the same careful attention he had once given to building kitchen cabinets and garden sheds. His hands, though not as steady as they once were, still knew how to measure twice and cut once. He sanded every surface until it was smooth as silk, painted the walls a soft yellow color that would work for either a boy or a girl, and built a cradle from oak wood that would last for generations. Every evening after dinner, Margaret would find William in the nursery, checking his work, adjusting something tiny, or simply standing in the doorway imagining the baby who would soon sleep there. The room smelled of fresh paint and new wood, but also of dreams and hope and the kind of love that had been waiting 48 years to find its purpose. Margaret wore upon tiny blankets and booties, her fingers moving with the muscle memory of a skill she had learned decades ago but never had reason to use. Her mother had taught her to knit when she was just a girl, and over the years she had made scarves for William, sweaters for their nieces and nephews, and blankets for charity. But knitting for her own baby felt different, each stitch carrying prayers and wishes and love that seemed to flow directly from her heart through her hands into the soft wool. During the difficult moments, when Margaret felt sick or tired, when doubt crept into their minds like unwelcome visitors, William would remind her of his words from that first day. "This baby chose us, Margaret," he would say, helping her to a comfortable chair or bringing her a cup of tea. She knew we would love her with everything we've learned about love in our lifetime together. As Margaret's pregnancy progressed through the months, their excitement grew stronger than their fears. They were about to become first-time parents, at an age when most people were becoming great-grandparents, and instead of feeling embarrassed or worried about what others might think, they began to feel proud of the unique gift they were about to receive. On a crisp morning in October, when the leaves were turning golden and the air carried the promise of winter, baby Emma Rose Thompson entered the world, healthy and perfect in every way. The delivery room at the county hospital, 30 miles from their village, became a place of wonder as doctors and nurses witnessed something they had never seen before. Margaret, now 73, held her daughter for the first time while William, 79, sat beside the hospital bed with tears of joy streaming down his weathered face. The baby was small but strong, with tiny fingers that gripped Margaret's, thumb with surprising determination and dark eyes that seemed to look directly into her soul. Emma Rose weighed exactly 6 pounds and 2 ounces, and her first cry filled the room with a sound that Margaret and William had waited their entire married life to hear. It was the most beautiful music either of them had ever experienced. "She's beautiful," William whispered, gently touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger, afraid he might hurt something so delicate and precious. His voice was full of awe, as if he could not quite believe that this miracle was real, that after all these years, he was finally holding his own child, just like her mother. Margaret looked up at her husband through her own tears, seeing in his eyes the same wonder she felt in her heart. This was the moment they had dreamed about for decades, the moment that had seemed impossible until it happened. Emma Rose had William's strong chin and Margaret's gentle nose, and already she seemed to have her own personality, making little sounds and movements that were uniquely her own. The nurses marveled at the love radiating from the new parents. They had delivered hundreds of babies over the years, but there was something special about watching Margaret and William with their daughter, despite their age. Margaret and William glowed with the same wonder and devotion as any young couple, welcoming their first child, perhaps even more so, because they understood how precious and rare this gift truly was. Nurse Patricia, who had worked in the maternity ward for 15 years, later told her colleagues that she had never seen new parents who seemed so grateful, so completely amazed by their baby. Most new parents were excited, of course, but Margaret and William looked at Emma Rose as if she were made of starlight and dreams, as if they could not quite believe she was real. The 3 days they spent in the hospital were like living in a beautiful dream. Margaret learned to feed Emma Rose, marveling at how natural it felt despite her age. William changed his first diaper with the same careful attention he had once given to his carpentry work, treating each task as if it were the most important job he had ever done. The other new parents in the ward were curious about the older couple, but their questions melted away when they saw the pure joy on Margaret and William's faces dot as they prepared to take Emma home to Millbrook. William shared one final thought that would stay with Margaret forever. He was holding Emma Rose while Margaret packed their small suitcase, and she noticed him staring out the hospital window with a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know, my love, people keep asking if we're worried about being older parents," he said, his voice quiet but certain. "But I think Emma is the luckiest baby in the world." Margaret looked at him curiously, pausing in her packing to give him her full attention. She had wondered the same thing herself during the long months of pregnancy. Would they have enough energy? Would they live long enough to see Emma grow up? Would other children tease her for having grandparents instead of parents? She gets to be raised by 2 people who have spent 48 years learning how to love unconditionally. William continued, his eyes still fixed on their daughter's sleeping face. She gets parents who understand that every day is precious, every moment is a gift, and every challenge can be overcome with patience and kindness. His words settled into Margaret's heart like seeds finding fertile ground. He was right. She realized they might not be young parents, but they were something perhaps even better. They were parents who had been tested by life and had emerged stronger, kinder, and more grateful for every blessing. We know how to forgive quickly because we've learned that holding grudges only hurts ourselves, William went on. We know how to appreciate small moments because we've lived long enough to understand that small moments are actually the big moments. We know how to be patient because we've waited our whole lives for this miracle. The small family returned to their village the next morning, where they discovered that the entire community of Millbrook had decorated their street with welcome home banners. Mrs. Davies had organized the whole thing, and neighbors who had once whispered doubts now stood in their gardens clapping and cheering as William helped Margaret from the car while she carried Emma Rose. The banners read "Welcome home, Emma Rose," and "Congratulations to the Thompson family," and someone had even hung balloons from their garden gate. Margaret and William's story had touched hearts far beyond their little corner of England, proving that love knows no age limits and miracles can happen when we least expect them but most need them. The end.